Hello, everybody. Today we're talking about the interesting topic about the three realms of heaven. And I will explain why there is four realms of the universe. Inside the universe and outside the universe. So let's look at what Paul has to say in 2 Corinthians 12, 2-4. I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, whether in the body I cannot tell, or whether out the body I cannot tell. God knoweth. Such as one caught up to the third heaven. And then verse 4 says, I'm going to skip verse 3. It says, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. So, the third heaven, as stated by the Apostle Paul, is paradise. So there are three heavens. The first heaven is the atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere, which is not the typical way of referring to heaven in our days. It is usually referred to heaven as God's dwelling. But there are actually three different heavens: the atmosphere, space, and God's dwelling place, the typical use for the word heaven. So, first, we're going to look at the atmosphere, the first heaven. Genesis 7:10 says, and it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. I'm not sure if that's the right one. Oh, yeah, it is. The 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So it says the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So that's the atmosphere, the first heaven. The second heaven is space. Not your typical use of the word heaven in these modern days. But we'll look at Ephesians 3:10. And Psalm 19:1. Ephesians 3:10. There you go. So, the first verse is Ephesians 3:10, which I'm not going to read, but I will read Psalm 19:1. There's not that many verses on space being a heaven, but there are. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night sheweth knowledge. So these are the first two types of heavens: the atmosphere and space. The interesting part, which we'll speak about now, is the third heaven, which is your typical use of heaven in these years or these days. So, between the space, the second heaven, and the third heaven, God's dwelling place, paradise, and God's dwelling, is a barrier. Common knowledge, common sense tells us that there is a barrier, because you cannot cross space and go into God's dwelling as a regular human being. So as we know, humans have three parts: body, soul, and spirit. Your body, your physical body in which you touch things, cannot pass through that barrier. This is a spiritual barrier that only allows spirit beings and spiritual human bodies to pass through into heaven. So you have to be a spirit to be able to pass through and go into heaven. So either a fallen angel, an angel, or a human spirit when you die. When you die, you're able to pass through that barrier and up, since you're in a spiritual body now. In a physical body, you cannot go through that barrier. So, if you have your physical body, you cannot pass through that barrier. And once you pass that spiritual barrier, only allowing spiritual things through, you get into the third heaven, God's dwelling. And in the third heaven is divided into two parts, God's dwelling and the human paradise. That is where we go after we die. So the third heaven is beyond physical human access. But once you die, you have access to that third heaven if you're a faithful Christian. Today, we're not going to get into too much detail on the underworld, hell, but inside earth is hell, the underworld. Why? Well, we know in various verses of the Bible, which we'll talk in the next video. We're not going to mention that right now, but in the next video, that hell is inside the hottest part of the earth. And so there are 4 realms inside our universe and outside. Hell, the atmosphere, the first heaven, second heaven, and third heaven. So there are 4 realms. Let me repeat that again. The first realm is hell, and then we have the first heaven, second heaven, and third heaven. And like I said, inside God, the third heaven is God's dwelling place, and as we know, angelic dwelling place and human spirits dwelling place. We're going to look at a verse in Isaiah, which I'll tell you which part of Isaiah it is right now. The Bible mentions these spirit beings known as the seraphim who live and worship God. And they worship God, and they are in his throne. And it's Isaiah 6. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With 20 he covered his face, and with 20 he covered his feet, and with 20 he did fly. And one cried unto another, and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So like I said, it says in the Bible, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, and above it stood the seraphims. So these spiritual beings, these angelic beings, the seraphim, dwelled in God's dwelling place. So the third heaven, our typical heaven, is divided not into 2 parts, but into 3 parts. God's dwelling place, angelic dwelling place, and human spirit dwelling place. But not all angels dwell in God's throne. Only special kinds of angels, like the seraphim and the cherubim, dwell there. But this is basically everything for today. And if you look at the next video, I will go into much detail on the levels of hell and the underworld. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe.